Good morning. Thank you very much for this very good invitation here, and I'm very pleased. A fantastic panel, actually. So congratulations. So I'm going to follow up from Karen, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the policy side in the EU and what the industry in Europe itself is thinking about what needs to be done for the future. So what I'm going to talk about is, you have heard, of course, from Karen already that minerals and metals are the basis for our industrial production processes and for many other parts like agriculture, etc. We also provide minerals. So we provide all these products and these raw materials for all these modern infrastructure and technologies. And Karen had already said we do have an issue that the demand in any of the consultancy reports that we have and any of the statistical analysis, be it UN, be it OECD, be it EU, whatever, we have a clear indication that the demand will grow. We cannot completely sort of reduce the consumption, maybe in some areas, but overall, all these people want a standard of living like we have, and hence we have to really consider that we need to have these raw materials. And this means actually that most of the forecasts say that the raw material demands will increase by at least double what we have today. European mining companies and technology companies are still in many areas providing the global role in securing these raw materials, and they provide the technology and the know-how. And I think this is what we would like to see in the future as well. So let me turn towards the politics a little bit. Thanks to some major intervention of the EIT and some other players, one of the commissioners, the Vice President Šefčovič, has actually realized that for all the other policy areas that the EU is currently underwriting, so climate change policies, resource efficiency, energy efficiency, technology change, raw materials are absolutely indispensable. And this is almost like what we had 10 years ago, when the downstream industry said, you know, for our future development, we require more raw materials and we need to have a secure access to these, otherwise we're not going to invest. And we are finding ourselves 10 years later basically at the same point. So downstream industries, with all the technological change, is telling the Commission in many areas, whether it be mobility, energy transition, etc., that actually they need secure access to raw materials, otherwise they cannot plan, they cannot invest. And so this is a major step forward again from our perspective, that the policymakers in Brussels have realized again they cannot do it without raw materials, and their policies need to be adapted to that. So this is important. And as Karen said, you know, if you do any projection, we're going to see an increase. But we see an increase in metallic ores a little bit, definitely in non-metallic minerals, and of course in biomass. So all of them are going to increase, all of them are going to be used in the future, and we need to see how we can possibly supply this and incorporate all the standards that everybody is expecting from us. So let me turn for a moment to a couple of these key policies that the EU has. So the energy transition. The Commission is currently requesting all member states and all industrial sectors to provide decarbonisation strategies by sector. And this is a typical example where people have said, okay, so if we look at the whole industry sector and we look at a complete decarbonization scenario, what is the potential increase of materials that we expect? Okay, these are estimations to a certain degree, but still they give a very clear tendency. And the same is for the transport sector. People have sat down and have said, okay, so decarbonization, replacing all sorts of material, higher energy efficiency, different energy sources, what does it actually mean? So this I think is a typical type of study. Then you have, of course, what the EU did over the last years, an assessment of what is called critical. Critical means critical for the economy, means important for the economy and difficult to source potentially. And you can see the tendency. 2011 we had 14 minerals, 2017 we had already 27, which there were a few added in the assessment, but overall the body remained the same. The methodology has been slightly refined, but not sufficiently to change actually the whole exercise. And it just means that despite 10 years of raw materials policy, we've actually ended up to double the amount of materials that are critical for us. Now this should give the policymakers something to think about. No, but it's energy policy in the EU, and it is mobility. That's the big two that we have at the moment. And as already was mentioned by Karen, we have an incredible dependency on a number of these raw materials for what we are intending to do. So we really need more exploration, and we need more extraction. And we need recycling of old deposits, possibly, where we can find some of these materials. The Joint Research Centre of the European Commission has done a number of studies and also has looked at the expected demand of metals for all these technologies. And you can see here what are the key minerals that we are looking at. And you can also see, of course, on the left-hand side, again, we have all the materials that are mostly sourced at the moment from China, some from Canada, but mostly from China. And the Chinese have a new policy, as you might have looked up, where they say we're trying to not export our raw materials anymore, we're going to use them ourselves and actually export the higher value added products. So where are we going to get this material from? The JRC has also done a specific analysis for the critical materials for the energy sector, and they've gone through 60 metals and streamed them all down, and you can see again here on the right hand side is the ones that landed on the critical raw materials list. But I mean, just to see how much effort the EU at the moment is putting into assessing what they actually need, what they might need, and what are potentially the policy options they need to put in place. And I would say, maybe Karen will agree with me, that at the moment the policy makers are not as strategic as the Chinese are, but at least they are starting to think in a much more strategic way. And I think this is really an important point here. Expected growth rates, again, for low carbon technologies, as published in the EC scoreboard in 2017. Same picture, same expectation of high growth rates. Now, I mean, if I was an investor, I would be very happy to see these slides. I would say, okay, so how do we make this happen? Because it's obviously that from many different sources, there are many different forecasts that point in the same direction. From a Euromines point of view, we really think that we still have a lot of resources in the EU. And we would have a lot of resources in Norway. I mean, there is no question that even for most of the EU countries, exploration has not been conducted with the latest technology, the latest available technology. There is a huge deficit in exploration, but there is also a deficit in investment, and there is a deficit in getting the permits from the member states up and running. The demand will grow, and we need to look after the standards of our operations. We really need to put more effort into making sure that our operations are sound and solid. In terms of efficiency, as I said, the EU is putting a lot of effort at the moment on member states, but also on industrial sectors to prove actually energy efficiency and energy decarbonisation in their energy use. Euromines is currently preparing a decarbonisation strategy for the extractive sector, and we need to continue working in this area because for some of the materials, switching the electricity grid is a solution that gives 60–75% improvement on the energy, on the CO2 emissions. But for some, we will never be able to actually eliminate the CO2 because they are in the mineral. The CO2 gets emitted after the processing, and we actually need something like carbon capture, sequestration, or utilization in some form. And we need to do much more research in that area to try to find really viable, economically viable solutions for this. So, 2030, 2050, we really think we need to provide the base load, at least, for the EU economy. We cannot be as dependent as we've been in the past. We need to really deploy new technologies. we need to improve our resource efficiency and recovery, and we really need to match all of this with the adaptation of new technologies, safe workplaces, and better environmental protection. So this is our aim, and this is what we've been telling the Commission, that we really need not just these very exotic little materials that we need, but we also need the base, we need copper, we need iron, we need zinc, and nickel, and we need to provide this at least at a sustainable level. What is on offer in the EU and in Norway, same, is relatively stable legal frameworks. We've, in the last 10 years, revised 18 out of the 28 EU member states' mineral policies. We have good national geological surveys, but they need to be supported in the future. They need to be continue to be supported. We have quite a number of studies. We're in close cooperation with the EU member states on a number of these points. We've had good EU R&D funding in the past years. I mean, we can always have more, but I mean, it was a good envelope for which we could launch quite a number of projects. We have the EIT on raw materials, which is an absolute asset for the industry and I think for member states and the Commission. And we have very good associations that have continuous debate, professional debates about these issues. So all of this is in place, so we just need to deploy it and make more use of it. Couple of comments on the current EU policies and what I think and what my members think should be looked at. There's a new EU proposal on sustainable financing. Now, this is a really curious one. The EU has figured out that there is a gap of investment into green technologies, and instead of saying we should attract more investment and generate more investment, they just say we should redirect it. That's the first mistake. But the second is, under this sustainable financing, they want to tell the banks whom they can give money to in the future, yes or no. And if you're not considered and not screened as a sustainable sector, you're not allowed to get any more money. Now that is a real threat to the business. And we're working very much with the Commission now on making sure that the raw materials sector is considered to be a sustainable sector eligible for banking. Big trouble I have there. But the point is really, if they went ahead with what they have in mind, it basically means that we're going to outsource everything because mining companies are just going to go to Canada, Australia, etc. and get their money there. And we're going to make ourselves much more dependent on outside funding to begin with. So this is a big issue that we have at the moment. Legal frameworks and permitting, we need much more capacity building. We have the situation in EU member states that in some countries there's only 1 or 2 inspectors of mines left. They've, after the economic crisis, reduced everything. They retired everybody that was close to retiring age and never replaced them. And so we have a real serious lack of physical capacity in the first place. And then secondly, I think along these lines of saving money everywhere, a lot of these people that are sitting in the authorities have not been on any further training course for the last 10, 15 years, which is also a problem. So we really need capacity building with the support of the EU and the member states. On the trade policies, the EU still is very often driven by the downstream users saying, I don't care where the material comes from as long as it's cheap. That needs to change. We cannot have just imports on the basis of cost. On the environmental policy and legislative issues, we have just adopted and published from the GRC in December the new BAT note on mine waste management. But we now have to make sure that it's actually better implemented across the member states. There has to be a consistent implementation, and there have to be inspections, and there have to be controls. For the Water Framework Directive, we have issues around water quality definitions, and we need to negotiate with the new Commission coming in December what we're going to do about this Water Framework Directive that in some ways is now inhibitive of extraction. Energy and climate change, we need more longer-term and stable carbon pricing. At the moment, in the last 6 months, it's gone quite up the scale, and that is a cost factor which needs to be looked at in more detail. We cannot have such price hikes continuously. That will make most of the European operations uncompetitive. And as I said, on the decarbonization strategies, we need some research and we need to understand where the technological limitations are and what we can do in those cases. Health and safety, always an important thing, but as you all know, the mining industry at the moment is in a huge strive for automation and digitization and removing people actually from the workplaces and using much more machinery. I think this will have a major impact on the health and safety discussions when it comes to occupational exposure. But still, it will remain an issue that we always have to monitor and work on very closely. So that's a bit the priorities that we have. I can also say there is a fantastic website in the EU which is called the RMIS, Raw Materials Information System Science Hub, where you can find a lot of information that has been assembled over the last years. It's really worth looking at it. It's quite fantastic. It's also technologically quite inspiring. So it's one of the websites I really like going on to. So have a look. It provides a lot of basic materials and information. And then there is the European Innovation Partnership. As Karen said, we've had it for 10 years. It's been a huge boost to the industry, to the research, to the knowledge exchange. And I can really only hope that we will be able to continue that under the new Commission in December. We will have to probably make lots of arguments to maintain it, but I think it's been a really good instrument for the sector to drive development forward, and really we would be fighting for keeping that. And it had technology, it had non-technology policy area, it had international cooperation projects, and it was really what the industry needed to put itself into the next century. So, and I think with that, I think we only need to work together to try to achieve what we have set out. Thank you very much.